Hello, and welcome to Lexington Remembers. Today is Wednesday, June 1st, first day of June 2016, and my name is Beverly Kelley, and my husband is with me. His name is Peter Kelley, and we will be interviewing, and very fortunate to be interviewing, Don Wilson from Wilson Farms. His family has a long, long history in town, and he's got a lot to tell us. So I think we'd like to begin, and I'll ask Don to maybe give us some background of when he was a little boy, siblings, grandparents, the farm, whatever.
Don.
I'll let him start.
Your earliest memories of being a boy in Lexington?
My earliest memories were starting to Adams School. And that was really the playground that they had in those days, because they had playground programs all summer. And all the kids went down there, and some of the teachers from both grammar school and high school used to work with the programs for the kids all summer. They had crafts, they had all kinds of sports, and it was a great program, and you got to know everybody, every kid in town, and you knew them be the grades ahead of you and the ones that were coming the next year.
So that was the neighborhood family, if you
That
will.
was the neighborhood family.
It centered around the elementary school, which is now the Waldorf School today. It was what the Adams School was until it closed, perhaps in the 70s or 80s.
My mother was a fourth grade teacher there.
Oh.
She taught there for 3 years. And for many years after I grew up and was operating the farm, different people would come in and say, "Oh, I had your mother for a fourth grade teacher."
Did you have your mother for fourth grade?
No, I didn't.
Okay,
In those days, married women didn't teach.
No, that's true.
that's
Yeah.
true. That's
That's
true.
right.
Okay, so now you were
So-
born in 1930.
Yeah,
So you went to Adams School starting in 1936 when you were 6 years old. No kindergarten back then, right? Just first grade.
we had Miss McCarran's kindergarten,
Oh, okay.
which was up at the corner of Independence Ave and Mass Avenue,
Oh, okay.
next to the block of stores.
Yes.
And they had a large house, and times were tough then. They turned it into a kindergarten. And a lot of the neighborhood kids went to kindergarten. I remember I was pretty clumsy then. I guess I'm pretty clumsy now, but all the other kids could skip. And I couldn't skip. My feet they just wouldn't coordinate.
Well, you were eating a carrot or something.
Yeah, it must have been. And I went on, I think it was Christmas vacation, and came back, and all of a sudden I could at least skip. I couldn't do anything else, but I could skip.
Okay.
And I thought I'd made a real accomplishment.
Very good. So tell us about your memories of your parents or your grandparents and how it all started with the Wilsons in Lexington with farming.
Well, my grandmother came from Quebec, Canada. My grandfather came from Enniskillen in Northern Ireland. He was sponsored by his uncle, who operated a large farm for those days on Bow Street off Mass Avenue. Later, he sold it to the Cataldo family, which is well known in Lexington for
Yep.
many generations. My grandfather worked there for 3 or 4 years and wanted to go out on his own. So he went to, as far as I can trace it, the last one of that Brown family was a spinster by the name Miss Fisk. It wasn't Mrs. Fisk, it was Miss Fisk. And she had been a school teacher, and she lived in one of the houses at the time. So the deal on, we rented the farms. The family had moved back to Boston. And
The Fisk family.
The Fisk family.
Okay.
And they didn't want to put Miss Fisk out because she was quite elderly then. And the deal was you could rent it, but Miss Fisk has to stay as long as she wants to. And as a little boy, I remember, probably I was through the first grade, 6 or 7 years old. Miss Fisk passed away, and then we had that's where my mother and father lived.
And what house is this? Is it still standing?
Yeah, it's number 6, 4, it's a two-family now. 4 and 6 Pleasant Street. That's the two-family.
Okay, that's on the side of the farm,
It's
just
on the
before.
side of the farm.
Oh,
But the Wilsons don't own that house any longer, do they?
No.
Okay.
No.
So,
now siblings or cousins that you were close to, or?
Well, the closest cousins lived right in the house across the street, which would have been number 3 Pleasant Street. It's a little cottage type, cottage type.
Right.
And my cousin Barbara was 3 years younger, I believe. And my cousin Alan was
Alan was, okay.
6 years younger.
Oh,
And we all, the farm was our playground. Because our parents worked there, and
yeah,
the farm happened to be the playground, so we all stayed there. They had the cows in the barn, and the horses, of course, and some calves. And that was where we went. We went across the street.
Yeah,
Barbara and Alan
right.
went across the street. And my cousin Alan and I worked together until he died. We worked together every single day of our life, really, when it was work.
mhm.
And neither one of us ever worked anywhere else.
So how old do you think you were when you started actually working at the farm?
When it was required was after you left the 6th grade. There was no volunteer then. That was,
Okay.
you were required.
Okay,
Up to the 6th grade, you sort of did what you wanted and maybe got in the way even, I don't know. But outside of
Okay.
that, after the 6th grade, it was over.
but
okay.
you were anxious to get past the 6th grade to work on the farm? You were
No,
looking
sir.
forward to that?
Yes, I was, really.
Oh, that's good. Well, you stayed a long time now.
Yeah.
You're 86.
85.
Oh, excuse
No,
me.
don't give me
Sorry.
another year. It's bad enough 85.
All right, well, you'll be 86 by the time the interview's over.
Okay.
So, all right, better part of 80 years working on the farm, huh?
Yeah, better part of 80 years.
There's gotta be some good stories about that, as well as the other farmers you knew in Lexington over the years.
I think we knew every farm in Lexington, we did. And what amazes me, the amount of farms, I started writing them down 3 days ago. And I got through one night and said, I'm all done. And I thought one little while later, oh, I forget this area or that area. It took me 3 days to write all the farms down in Lexington. It would take the whole interview if I named them one by one.
Wow,
I can
and
appreciate
stories
that.
about them.
How about the ones that the families are still part of Lexington, perhaps the Dailies or Carrolls?
Well, the Daily started in 1890, 1880, no, 1881, the Daily started. And the Carrolls started about 1890 roughly, I couldn't get the exact date. But both, the Dailies had a dairy farm at first.
This was down on Merritt Road?
On Merritt Road, the
Family
barn
farm.
was right by the street, almost touching the street. It was a 2-story barn. This foundation is still there. They've got a shed over it, but it's not a barn anymore.
Okay. And what happened to that barn? Just fall down or did it burn down?
I think it burned down. And they moved back about 1,000 feet to a high spot on the land. And then they started breeding pigs, and it was a pig farm.
Okay.
there were a
As
lot
was,
of pig farms in Lexington, weren't there at one time?
Carroll's had dairy and pigs. Outside of Woburn, Lexington probably had more pigs. They did have more pigs per capita than any
Really?
state in the town and Middlesex County. Carroll started, and Carroll's was a little bit bigger farm. The Daily Farm and the 2 farms behind it. Mr. Meek had a dairy farm, and he had his own. They had their own milk route. Of course, there was no pasteurizing in those days, And they bottle the milk, but they did have glass bottles. Before that, they used to ladle it out and put it in your container. But they had glass bottles.
Well, in your day, were they still bottling at the Sellers bottling plant on Concord Ave?
Yes, yeah. There were 2 bottling plants, Sellers, 3. There was Sellers, there was Lawrence Farm, which was the Shanahan family.
Okay.
That was a large operation. They had 6 milk routes from Boston, from Cambridge, right up through Arlington, Belmont, and Lexington.
And where was their bottling plant?
Right next to our farm. It was right by the cow barn
On Pleasant Street?
on Pleasant Street.
Okay.
That farm, you had about, the main barn held 24 milkers. The secondary barn held about 20. Then they raised a lot of their young stock. So at any time they had 75 cows there. And they pastured them because they didn't have enough pasture. They pastured them up where the West Farm is,
Oh, okay.
that whole side hill.
That's where Lynn Wilson
Where
lives,
Lynn
right?
Wilson lives,
Right.
yes.
Yep.
And we used to get a ride in the milk. They had the old type Divco milk trucks. And we used to get, I'd love to ride in those. There was the stand-up delivery, and you drove it standing up.
Right. Oh, they had a little seat in there, though.
Yeah, you could sit back in the seat a little bit, but when you were delivering, you stood up.
Right.
And they'd take us, I thought we were having, a great time. The fellows that were supposed to get the cows in at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the summertime would take us across Route 2 and into the first field, which now is part of the Belmont Country Club. And 2 or 3 of us kids and a couple of the Shanahan kids would get the cows, and usually they'd be waiting at the fence right at Route 2.
Right.
And 2 of us, 3 of us would go out and we'd hold up Route 2, okay, and we'd drive the cows across Route 2 and onto Watertown Street. Then went a little ways up Watertown Street and we took a shortcut through the woods. And the cows knew where they were going to start with.
Sure.
And we thought we were great because they let us do it. Of course, the guy said, those kids don't know any better. They do go for a mile walk and thank us.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's what it is when you're a kid.
And Dawn, speaking of Route 2, that was obviously before it was widened, because it used to be just one lane in each direction, is that right? So you could hold up traffic.
Yeah, you could.
You couldn't do that
there
today.
wasn't that much traffic. When the second widening of Route 2 came was when Childs put a gas station
I
in.
remember Child's gas
Yeah.
station, I do.
Okay, so it went from a 2-lane road to a 4-lane road to a 6-lane
Yeah,
road.
right.
The last expansion was in the 60s. That's
Yes.
when they lost Child's gas station.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think you're speaking of perhaps back in the 30s when it wasn't it the Yankee Division Highway or the Minuteman Highway or something?
Yeah, I think it was a Minuteman Highway, but
Okay.
I really didn't drive the cows until I was probably 10 or 11 years old. That was just to get a ride in the milk truck. That was the only reason.
Okay. Well, that was a good reason.
And
So what other dairy farms do you recall operating? And Wilson had dairy cows too for a
Yeah.
while, right?
yeah, we always kept 5 or 6.
Okay, did you sell any of the milk or have it
No,
pasteurized?
I noticed, no, we didn't, but I noticed in some of my grandfather's notes, we sold butter. There were a lot of people that worked on the farm and a lot that boarded in the houses or in the smaller house on the farm. And so it took a lot of milk. As long as they helped milk, they got their own free milk.
They got their milk.
Got their milk. And there was always a couple of dry cows. You're probably only milking 3 cows at a time or 2. But all these other little farms like Meeks, and there were 2 15-acre farms behind Daly's, going toward the Bowman School.
Oh, okay.
But between the Bowman School and Daly's were 2 farms in there. One was a dairy farm, and one was a market garden. And
Well, there was a Swenson farm on
on Merritt Road.
Merritt Road next
that
to
would be
little further down from Daly's.
west of the Bacon Street, which isn't a street.
Right,
Right. That goes
It's a
down,
long driveway.
behind Daly's.
Yeah.
down by the Clematis Brook down in there. Okay, so was Swanson's farm a dairy farm?
Swenson's was a
Swenson.
big dairy farm.
Yeah.
They had, between the two, they had another farm on Spring Street. And they probably ran at least 200 milk cows at that time.
So
So
they were
now,
pretty
Those are-
dominant
that was-
until what, after the war?
Yeah.
is that where Raytheon was, which is now where Shire was?
Yes,
Is that
yes.
where, right on, like Route 2,
Yeah.
Spring Street? That was the Swenson farm,
That was
dairy farm.
Kelsey Ranch.
Kelsey Ranch.
Okay. That was precursor to Waldorf, restaurant chain in Boston.
Oh, yeah, right.
And the man that owned that bought the Kelsey Ranch. Like, it was never, they call it a ranch. That was a show place. It was one of the show place farms. It was a 2-story stone dairy barn, which each floor, it was 2 stories. Each farm, each floor held about 40 cows, so they had 80 cows in that one barn.
Mm.
It was
Now, was
interesting.
that barn, Don, was that barn on Spring Street?
No, it was,
Shade?
the house was on Spring Street.
So
The barn would have been northwest of that, and it was probably about 300 feet off the road.
okay, perhaps up sort of where Shade Street passes through now?
No, the other direction, where 128 would be.
Okay,
Oh,
okay.
Up at Shade Street, they also, their other endeavor was a fur farm.
fur?
And fur. They had mink and fox. And at that time, silver fox was, if you had silver fox, you were in the chips. But everybody else knew it too, so they built a big fence around it, and that didn't work too well. It kept the foxes in, but it didn't keep the people out.
Okay.
So there was a tower there, like a lighthouse. And you could go up in the tower, and they said there was somebody there all the time, but that was just to keep more people away. But it was a watchtower to watch the silver fox were that valuable
Wow,
that they had a 24-hour watch on the
Watch.
silver fox.
interesting.
There were a lot of mink farms in Lexington when you picked them out one by one.
Really?
But the one I remember was the Silver Fox Farm
Mhm.
up where Shire was in the hill.
Okay.
Now, how long did those mink or fox farms
Fur-
run?
fur
Did that
farms.
carry through the World War II?
That carried through World War II. There was another fairly good-sized one run by the Buttrick family right next to the East Lexington Fire Station. If you walked out the back door of the fire station today,
Yeah.
after the first 3 steps, you would be where the mink farm was.
Oh.
There was a barn there, the Buttrick house, there were 2 Buttrick houses, one on Locust Avenue and one on Mass Avenue. And the barn was quite a bit larger than it is today. They cut the barn about 3/4 off and just remodeled it as a garage.
Oh,
And there was a house built in the lot beside
but
it.
it's still there today?
The house and the part of the barn
Part
is
of the
still,
barn.
yeah.
Oh.
But mink were, let's see, $25, if I can remember right. Muskrats were $2 to $3. And
Muskrat.
a lot of the kids were, when I was in high school, because I had to work on the farm and take care of the chickens and things, so I didn't get to do it. But a lot of the boys would run a trap line all fall during the trapping season, fall and winter. And in those days, whatever the wages were, probably Jefferson Union at that time would be about, if you were lucky, $30 a week. That was a good week's pay. All the boys had to do was catch 1 mink and 2 or 3 muskrats, we call them rats, and that was more than a man working full-time would make. No, the kids had but a lot of those kids paid, and they wanted to go to college or something. There are a good many young kids in Lexington, boys, that paid their way through college, what they caught in the wintertime with the fur.
That's very interesting. I had no idea. But they didn't breed them at this farm. They just caught them and kept them there until they could sell them.
Caught them and
Yeah.
skinned them after school and put them on a board to dry them.
Oh, gee.
And then they sold them. A buyer came around 2 or 3 days out of the week
Oh, really?
because they had to be processed so that they spoiled.
Okay.
And so those were all, the minks and the muskrats and all were just running around town in the wetlands and, you
They
know,
were
they
everywhere.
trapped them
What
there.
about
everywhere.
beavers? They didn't go for beavers? Because that's a nice fur.
I don't remember anybody trapping a beaver. Maybe they had them all trapped out by them or not, I don't know. But I never heard of it, the kids saying, I got a beaver this morning.
Right.
Yeah,
So let's go back to the farm here now, because I'm
All right.
curious as to, because everyone knows Wilson's Farm today. It's a pretty active operation and it's a pretty popular place. So we don't want to lose track of the years that you recall of the farming on the Wilson Farm property now. And your earliest memories are the mid-30s. You're going to school at Adams School. After 6th grade, it was back to the farm.
Yep, definitely.
But after 6th grade, you went to probably the Muzzy School. Was that both 7th through 12th grade? So there was-
Yes. We had junior high on one side of it,
Okay,
and then we had the high school on the south side,
okay. And you graduated high school in?
48.
48, okay. Well, in 1948, there were also students from Bedford and Burlington?
Burlington had left before, by the time we got to high school. It was
Okay.
Bedford.
Just Bedford carried through to the 12th grade.
So the two towns, your friends came from both towns. You knew everybody in Bedford and they know everybody in Lexington. And we felt bad when the Bedford kids got transferred to their new high school. But you had a lot of friends leaving the classes
Yeah.
The
then.
Bedford or the Burlington?
Bedford,
Bedford,
Burlington was transferred before I got to high school.
I see. But so you had Bedford friends that shared the high school with you?
Yes, right through the 12th grade.
I see.
They let the ones that there stay until they graduated.
So once you were past 6th grade, Don, you worked the farm and that's all you ever did. And
Yes.
as the years went by, you spent your whole summers and after school hours doing what needed to be done on the farm.
Yep.
Did you go on to college or anything, or was that not something you needed to do?
I was signed up for UMass and accepted. And my mother died during the war. My father was a single parent at that time. And the summer that I was supposed to go to college in the fall, my Uncle Walter died, which was my father's brother. That would have been Alan's and Barbara's father.
Okay.
So my father here is left with nobody in the house and nobody to work on the farm. He was all alone.
Yeah.
So I said, I've got to put it off. So I canceled it and I said, I'll go back later. I never went back later.
No.
Sounds like Jimmy Stewart had a wonderful life, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's true.
So,
Okay.
okay, I don't recall, did we speak of, did you have siblings, brothers or sisters?
No, I didn't.
Okay,
I had a lot of cousins. My Aunt Doris and Uncle Fred had twin girls and an older girl. And my Aunt Marion had 2 boys. And all of anywhere from 2 years old to teenagers at that time.
so within your generation, Dawn, were there others, other than your cousin Alan, who participated in running the farm?
No, just Alan and I.
Okay. And tell us then about the first time you and Alan started to sell to the populace, to the citizens. Because before that time, you were a truck farmer, basically
Yeah.
took the stuff to Boston Market.
Well, and we sold to local stores.
Okay.
Oh.
And restaurants as well?
Yes, if they came out to
Right.
get things. We didn't deliver, but they came out and got a lot of the vegetables.
Did you deal with Boston? I mean, stores from Boston would come out and get your produce or not?
No,
Mostly
a
local.
buyer would come out. We had people with pickup trucks. And one of the things we raised a lot of celery, and it was a really premium celery. I mean, it's nothing like the celery you get today, and we don't even raise that premium type celery now. And when you cut it out of the field, trimmed it in the field, you always had the spare leaves. And we had a couple of people from Boston come out and buy the spare leaves, and they went to all the specialty restaurants in Boston. And if we were trimming a lot, they might get 20, 25 bushel of leaves. And I don't remember exactly what we got. It was probably 75 cents or 50 cents a bushel. And they took it in Boston, they would get $2 a bushel for it.
And what did they do with the celery leaves?
They used it in Chinese restaurants, bought a lot of it. That was one of the big suppliers. But they used it in their cooking. One of the things that was quite popular then was celery soup.
Okay.
And people don't think you can make celery soup out of celery, but it makes a delicious creamy soup.
I've made a celery soup.
It's great.
Yep.
But that was where we sold that. And the rest we had strawberries and we had tomatoes and all kinds of things. But right up and across from, I think it was 13 Pleasant Street. Well, right across from that there was a big ash tree, some rocks there, and a little place where you could pull off the road. And we made 2 of the farm boards that we used to bleach the celery with. It has to be about 1 inch thick and 12 inches wide, and they ran about 12 feet long. But we took 2 of those and made a little kind of stand like this with a piece on the bottom that just hold it. And they'd hold about 5 baskets of tomatoes on either side, but they'd be displayed. And we sold them all of them. And we did it again the next day, and we sold them all again, the tomatoes.
So this would have been tomato season,
Yeah.
August perhaps?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we said, hey, this is a pretty good idea. So we went along with that for quite a little while.
And excuse me, but was this you and Alan were doing this?
Yes.
You and Alan. Okay.
Well, so now Alan, as I recall, graduated high school in *53, you got out in '48.
Yeah.
So was before perhaps Alan got out of high school, you started doing this in the early '50s?
Yes, we started this in the early 50s.
Okay.
And we had a few apple trees on Pleasant Street up on the other side on the north side of the road. And one day we said, we were selling tomatoes in the fall and different things. And there was a lot of apples that dropped. It was early September. Well, let's take a couple of bushel apples up to Lawton's cider mill and have them crush them and put them in. They had glass gallon jugs then. And I think out of 2 bushels we got 5 gallons, I think it was. It was 5.5. And we took those down and we sold those all.
Now, who was buying this stuff? The locals or the people from Cambridge?
Probably, no, locals were automobile traffic.
Right.
I mean, there wasn't any foot traffic left home for
Were
a
they-
destination.
Were they city slickers that came out into Lexington to see the country and find a farmer like yourself?
Yeah, they're coming way out in the country.
Yeah, exactly.
Those days.
So you just did this on your own. I mean, I'm sure the older generation gave you the okay to do it,
Oh, yeah.
but you just decided this sounded like a good idea, and it evolved from there
Yeah.
to what it is
So
today.
you came to realize that what you were growing on your own land had more value to you to sell at the farm stand over
Yeah.
time than to sell it to wholesalers or restaurants. Or did you ever truck your produce into the city market?
Yes, I did. My uncle, Alan's father, my Uncle Walter, as he got older, he would either drive to market or take the trolley, usually drive in. And he'd go in at midnight and he'd tell the buyers, I've got 25 celery today, I've got 11 lettuce, I've got 30 bushels of beets, whatever. He said, and my nephew will be here at about 4 o'clock. I'd get up at 3:30 and take them in the truck. And he'd have them all sold when I got there. So all he did was take them off and either come home in his car or take the trolley to Arlington Heights and call some of us and we'd go down and get them at the Arlington Heights terminal.
And this was everything you grew right there. When did you expand? You now have a farm up in Litchfield, New Hampshire, is it?
Yes, yeah.
When did you start that?
1959 or 1960. First we were going to Milford, New Hampshire. Was a beautiful farm up there for sale. And in those days you negotiated with the owner, the farm was for sale, he'd sold the cows, the whole bit. And we talked it over and we decided we'd buy it. And I think somewhere we saved up $1,000 in cash. We went over, I drove up that morning, and I drove from Nashua to Milford, which seemed like I was going to the end of the world. And when I got there, I still had the money in my pocket, and we were talking pretty seriously about it. And I said, you know, when I went around the Milford Rotary, and then I had to go 2 more miles, I said, you know, it's going to take us an hour and a half to 2 hours to get here, and an hour and a half or 2 hours to get back. Maybe we ought to not do this. So I thanked Mr. Haywood, was the man that owned it, of Haywood's Ice Cream, Southern
sure.
New Hampshire.
We know Hayward's.
Yeah, and I thanked him very much, and I said, the reason I think we should put this down, because we'd be spending at least 2 to almost 3 hours a day traveling back and forth. So, put it down, and I said, there's got to be some land around here closer to Lexington.
Or closer to the, was the highway there then? It was there, right?
Yeah, it was sort of a highway. It was
Route
2 lane, no, 1 lane really.
3. Okay.
And I went to Litchfield. I knew most of the farmers up there. And I said, you know, we ought to get started up here a little bit. And they sent me to a man by Mr. Talent. And he owned a pretty fairly large acreage, 75 acres. It was a pretty big chunk. And he ran a boys' camp. He lived in Brookline, Brookline, Mass. And I told him what we wanted to do and about the family. And we talked about it. And I believe he wanted $500 an acre. I said, I really like this, but there's just no way. I said, it's just too much. But I said, you know, I talked to Alan and I talked to my father. He said, you know, it might be all right. So I went back to Jimmy, my son Jimmy was just born that July. And I went back to Mr. Talent and I said, you know, I appreciate it, but I said, I'm a little scared. I said, I've got a new son and we built a house of our own, we're building a house of our own. I'm pretty well against it. He said, but I'd already given him a $1,000 deposit.
Oh.
So I said, Mr. Talent, would you help me out, and if we can do it in another year, I said, we'll do it, but I just want to get our feet under us a little bit. And he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, son, listen to me, I'm going to do you a favor. So I said, oh, boy, he's going to give me the money back and we can look at it again. He said, I'm not going to give you your money back. He said, you've got the best deal and someday you will thank me for that $500 an acre. He said, someday it'll be worth $1,000 an acre. I said, well, that's quite a stretch. But he didn't give me the money back. We bought the land and we farmed it. And that was one of the first pieces we bought.
And that was in the early 50s, did you, or late 50s?
Mid-50s, mid to late 50s.
Okay.
How many acres are up there, Don?
600.
Oh,
600.
it started with 75, did
Well,
it? And then you added on?
We got to know everyone there and we were accepted in the community. We're part of the community there too.
Uh-huh.
And as the older farms retired, there wasn't quite the housing boom then. And as each farm, 20 acres, 60 acres, 10 acres, 45, you know, all little pieces. But they were all connected to each other.
Mhm.
And eventually we ended up with the 600 acres. But the people that were there were retired, and they said, I don't want to see houses here, and I want to remain, as long as I'm around, I want to see it still farmed. And we did a very nice job for them. We're friends with all of them, and they were very glad to have us as neighbors. And the town was very glad to have us. When we bought the last farm, it was in late November. That was a 200-acre farm, and they were afraid it was going to be developed. And the headline in the local paper, Nashua Telegraph, was a Christmas present for town of Litchfield. The farm has been saved.
Great.
But that's the way that every piece of land we bought there, we bought on a handshake, and we'll take care of it.
When did you actually build the first farm stand that had a roof on it?
It was in the early 50s, 55, 54, 55.
Well, I see some of the pictures, and we could perhaps get a shot of them there. What intrigues me is all the cars from the 50s and the 60s,
Yeah.
with the big fins and all that. So
The old
you had a
cars.
pretty good-looking farm stand by late 50s and into the 60s.
Yeah, we had a roof on it and cement block sides.
And
It was an overgrown two-car garage.
okay, and it sort of stretched over the years.
And it stretched to a three-car garage, then it had a overhang put on it.
And you used to have garage doors. I remember going in there, and you closed the garage doors at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Now, you didn't originally run 12 months a year, did you? The farm stand?
We didn't intend to, but soon, we never closed in the winter. We closed for a week, and we had so many people. We stayed closed for 2 weeks, starting in January, way back in 55, probably somewhere in there. And we had so many calls of so many people driving in the parking lot. There wasn't a very big parking lot then. That we said, well, we better open, because we had a lot of poultry. We had about 2,000 hens then, and eventually built up to 4,000. And you got to do something with the eggs. So then we had
Make an
other things.
omelet.
Yeah, that would be an awful big omelet. And people said, well, why don't you just open for the eggs and what you've got in storage, the squash and potatoes. So we did, and then we added a few other items from other farms. And we really never closed in the wintertime. That 2 weeks was a 2-week vacation.
When did you start selling Christmas trees, Don?
That was a couple of years later. It was 2 or 3 years later. Probably 57, 58 maybe.
Okay. So now the stand that's there now, which is quite a stand, was built in the 90s, was it? It says on the top of the farm. It was about 25 years ago, maybe?
Maybe 20 years ago.
Yeah.
96, 97. A lot of these dates I'm wrong on. I can
That's all right.
get
It's-
it somewhere.
doesn't
When you go home, look up on the top of the farm,
All
because
right.
it says what it is.
I have to ask my wife what day it is sometimes when I get up. So how am I going to do with it?
Oh, well, you're still active too, aren't you? Are you still driving the dump truck up to Litchfield each day?
Yeah, I still go. I leave home every morning at 6 o'clock, stop at the local diner up there where you know everybody, and have breakfast. The local diner is quite a fixture up there, because everybody stops in. You need something done, oh, the plumber's right there. Hey, will you go over the house and check this?
That's great.
Every contractor in town is there, right there, every trucking company, every salesman, and you know everybody.
Yeah.
You can do all of your business in 15 minutes that we spend all morning calling.
That's wonderful.
And everybody
Yeah.
sets out and goes to work, and everybody's to work where they're supposed to go.
So you drive up there every morning, and what is it you do when you get up there? Just-
Bother everybody.
Bother everybody.
Then he turns around and drives back.
No, we sort of,
Just
we've got a great
supervise.
manager up there,
Mhm.
Keith Marshall.
Mhm.
Does a great job, and we've got some great employees up there. And we sort of lay out what we're gonna do for the day, and most of the time, they've got everything laid out, what they're gonna do, and we talk about it and go in our different directions. Today is a perfect day, and yesterday, perfect day to make hay and straw. The wind is just right, the humidity is just right. You can't bale straw or hay really until noontime. The underneath moisture doesn't get out of it.
Mhm.
So you have to work a little later at night, but you start at noontime or 1 o'clock, and then you just keep going all day long. The day before, yesterday, we put in 1,000 bales of straw.
Wow.
Do you cut and bale all at the same day, or do you cut it and let it sit and dry?
Return it 2 or 3 times, ted it they call it, and this has been cut 7 days now, because we had a day of rain in there.
Right.
And it's,
And so you bale it, and what do you sell it to,
well,
agricultural or dairy farms or horse farms?
we sell it to the straw, we sell it to strawberry growers and people like that.
Oh, for cover.
Kind of perennial growers. We use a lot of it for, it takes around 900 to 1,000 bales to cover the strawberry fields we have up there. So the first 1,000 go there. And then we sell the rest to people that need it. And
Now, we're quickly approaching Strawberry Festival season, right? Are
Right.
we
I think
there yet?
we'll be picking, last year we started the 9th of June. This year it looks like we're gonna start, I would say about the 14th, 15th of June. I went down this morning, and I was up there this morning,
I believe it.
and there were a few little pink strawberries on there that just starting to turn
Color.
color.
So if you haven't scheduled that strawberry festival at the Lexington Farm Stand this year, huh? But sometime in the 3rd week of the month?
I think they've already, I think they said 15th to 19th on the
Oh, okay.
sign.
And how many years ago was it when you went for that Guinness Book of World Records for the biggest strawberry shortcake?
That was about 5 years or 6 years ago. That was a big strawberry shortcake.
That was a big strawberry shortcake. There's still some
So-
leftovers.
Yeah.
So what else? You grow hay and you grow strawberries up at that,
Oh,
in Litchfield. What
well.
else? Just everything?
everything. We grow a lot of blueberries, blackberries. There's about 5 acres of blueberries. Asparagus, a lot of asparagus, a lot of rhubarb. Then your regular crops, you've got your corn, you've got peas, beans, all kinds of squash, pumpkins, tomatoes, things that we can't grow in Lexington because it takes too much acreage.
Okay.
There's 110 acres of corn alone, sweet corn. Well, if you took 100 acres out of Lexington, there'd be nothing left.
How many acres do you have in Lexington?
Everything put together, it's about 30 acres.
30
A little bit, no, it's a little better than that if you put everything together.
Okay.
I think it's around 37 altogether. But see, that was again 3 farms.
Mm-hmm.
The Alderman farm, which was a veterinarian,
Mm-hmm.
and then the farm between us and West. It was a very long, narrow strip. It was 3.5 acres, but it went all the way from Mass Avenue to Peacock Farm. But it was
Oh.
probably only 125 feet wide, a little better.
Mhm.
And then there's a piece on the other. You put everything together, and you've got about 30 acres. But then the houses on top of that,
Right.
and greenhouses.
So you bring most of it down from Litchfield. And do you have other farms anywhere, or is it just Litchfield and Lexington?
We have one in Hudson, New Hampshire,
Oh,
and Bill Daly, his farm, we talked about that.
oh yeah,
We rent that from him, and
okay.
Because Bill's a farmer at heart, and
Yes.
every morning Bill walks, before he goes to work, walks the entire perimeter of the farm and tells us what's wrong.
Of your farm or his farm?
No, his farm.
Oh.
This farm.
Yeah, his farm. And anything that doesn't look right, he'll let us know. And that's, when he's here, is every morning,
Really?
yeah? And his brother John used to do the same thing.
He is a farmer at heart.
Yep, the farmer's at heart. And he just likes to see it being worked and used, and it's just a good working relationship between the two places.
Great.
It's great to see it there. And you, last time I was down there, you had peas, you had sunflowers, you had a number of different crops over the course of the season, right?
Yeah, and this year we switch it around all the time because you get thrip in onions and you get thrip in garlic. I didn't think they liked the taste of garlic, but they do. And we always grew the garlic in Lexington, which seems a rather strange crop to be grown in Lexington. And this year we've got it at up to Bill Daly's. And the people just love to see the garlic with the leaves on, and we bunch it. We harvest it in August, and we put it in racks in the greenhouse to dry. And it takes about 2 weeks to dry. And people like to buy it because not only do they use the clove of the garlic, but they cut the leaves and cut them very finely and sprinkle it on whenever they use garlic. It looks like, well, it's just dried leaves cut up. The leaves are about a foot long, and as they dry, they get very
Run it
crisp.
through a blender or something?
Yeah, they
Dry out a
run
little
it through a blender and put it away in little
So it's
jars.
garlic salt.
It's not as strong as the clove though, right?
No, it's not as strong as the cloves,
But
but
it has flavor.
yeah,
Yeah. Huh.
yeah, they use that in cooking a lot.
So right now, the farm is run by you, I know, but supported by Scott and your son Jim. Scott, Allen's son.
Scott is
And-
Alan's son, and Jim is my son. Jim does the farm and runs the farm operations.
The stand you mean, or the?
No,
out in the-
no, the farm outside.
Fields. He's the
Oh.
field man.
Yeah.
Field, and with the poultry, of course, he helps me on that.
How many chickens do you have now?
Yeah. Usually we run around 2,000.
Oh,
Here in Lexington.
Yeah.
oh,
And in the summertime, we keep the laying hens 1 year. At this time, we'll have around 4,000 because we get 2,000 chicks. They're growing in New Hampshire. I have a few there for the kids to see. And by the time they're mature to start to lay, we'll sell the older flock off. They would lay the second and third year, but the egg quality isn't as good. Mainly the shell quality, more so than the interior quality.
So they become fryers.
No, they're pretty tough for a fryer.
Okay, so
But you can't make good chicken soup without a fowl. A fryer will not make good chicken soup no matter what you do to it. So we have a lot of customers just for the fowl.
oh, okay.
I'm sure Lynn knows all that too.
Oh, Lynn
because
knows
she wrote-
all of that. She's a
right.
great cook.
She wrote that wonderful cookbook.
Yeah.
And that was what, 20 or 30 years ago maybe, but it's still a good seller.
Yeah, we still sell a lot of that.
Yeah, yeah.
Over the last several years, let's say 10, 20 years, maybe since the new farm stands open, have you seen a change in the marketplace where the customer is looking for different types of crops, different types of
Yes,
vegetables?
We grow all kinds of herbs now, things that I never even knew existed. But there's demand for it now, and pea tendrils. We plant special peas very close together and harvest them with a mechanical harvester. They're probably about 4 inches high and just starting to get the little tendril on it with a little curve. And we have a mechanical harvester that can clip that right off, harvest it, and then we bag that up. And people just love pea tendrils. I don't know why. Is the different crops that people like and they want to try them, especially if they've seen a cooking show on television.
When are you going to go into the cooking show business then? And have, although you're into a number of good ideas that stimulate the appetite and stimulate the mind. So.
Well, we do have about 10 or 12 cooking classes a year.
Oh, at the farm.
At the farm, and we have the chef, a French chef from France, and we have another chef for the takeout cooked vegetables. And they always use the classes. They sell out every time, and they have it in the evening down in the kitchens that we have.
I have a question. Lexington has a large Asian population now, and growing, and they tend to like Asian vegetables, and I know because I've seen them at like Market Basket.
Yeah.
Have you gotten in, because there's a large population in Lexington, have you gotten into that market yet?
Definitely, yes. Yeah.
Good.
And we grow, there's different populations. New Hampshire, we have Manchester, which has a lot of Russians.
Oh.
Russians Russians and German, and they do a lot of canning and preserving, and in the fall, they want the big cabbage. It's got to be that big, I mean, literally bigger than a basketball. And we have a crop of large specialty cabbage just for that one big cabbage for the Russian population. And we do the Chinese. When we find there's something we can grow that's a Chinese vegetable, we grow it.
Right.
And we're finding a lot of, especially the younger Chinese will come in and they know what they want, and that the older folks sort of go along with the young folks. They're not quite ready to totally get into the marketing. But the young people know what they want, they know what their mother and father want, and do really a great job. And they're great customers, they're great customers.
How do you decide what you'll try as a new crop? Is it your customers coming in looking for something and then doing some research to see if it makes sense to put some field production into that product?
We try it, heritage tomatoes. Some of you're paying more for the worst looking tomato you ever possibly could buy. You say, but it's the star of the tomato world really now. We started about 7 or 8 years ago. We talked about it, and we said let's try it. And we tried a couple of the heritage varieties, and just of the heritage varieties alone, there's well over 100 different heritage varieties. Problem with heritage varieties, they yield less, they cost more, and there's about 50% damage on them you can't use. I mean, it's just the nature of the animal. That's why they bred the newer type tomatoes, to get away from the problems in the old ones. But they have a flavor that's all their own.
So they must be more expensive than
They
everything.
they are more expensive.
I think it'd be great to talk to Don about some of the other farms he recalls around town in his day, because
Yes.
there are so few farmers left. You might be the only one now, Don.
No, there's three. There's Carol's, there's Bill Daly's, and ours.
Yeah, but
Ours was-
Johnny's growing golf balls now.
Oh, have you seen the new farm that they have over there with
The horse?
Yeah.
The horse.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
That is outstanding. That's
Yeah,
he
it's a
saved the
wonderful thing.
barn.
That's
He
great.
did a beautiful job on it. The fields look nice, the fences, and they've got that exercise ring.
Right,
And the best part of it is the job he's doing for the children.
right, the therapy
The therapy.
programs.
Right.
And I really didn't know what that was, and maybe we'll go into it later. It was an interesting story about our llama. It's a different story, but it's very interesting. But what Johnny is doing for those kids over there, and the help that it gives their mothers, it takes little pressure off them for a little while.
Right,
And the kids are so excited over the animals.
right. No,
I
it's a
these are
wonderful
special-
program.
These are special needs children, is that
Special
correct?
needs children.
Right.
It's quite a program he's got operating up there.
It really saved, that whole side of the hill, it's off Allen Street,
Right.
off of Waltham Street. And unfortunately, not too many people know it's there and know what it is.
Yeah, but sometimes it's good to keep it quiet.
But he doesn't grow anything anymore,
No, I
No.
don't think
No.
not vegetable crops.
no.
No, just golf balls on the
So,
lower 40.
Yeah,
So it's really you and Daly's.
Dailies.
That's it in Lexington now,
But there used to be so many there that you couldn't count them.
right?
The first vegetable experiment station in the United States was on Reed Street in Lexington.
Really?
And it later became Walrath greenhouses, but it was 1916, and it was the first one in the United States. Later, in the mid-30s, they moved it to Waltham, which became the Waltham
Yes.
Field
The
Station.
extension.
That was the original field station. And they brought out a lot of new varieties. There's the Waltham tomato, there's the Waltham broccoli, there's carrots that they brought out, butternut squash. Professor Bob Young perfected butternut squash. The butternut squash you see today came from Professor Bob Young and the Reed Street station.
So what was this station? I don't quite know what it was.
Well, it was greenhouses and buildings, a boiler room, and experimental. It was all compartmentized, and the little greenhouse might be, a large greenhouse would be sectioned off into 10 square feet, and they'd force the vegetable in there so they'd get, rather than one crop a year to improve it, they could get maybe 4 crops a year if they pushed it. So they'd get 4 years experience in 1 year.
And they were experimenting with how to grow a better beet or
Yeah,
better.
yeah, and they did it. The beet came from Arlington, Crosby's Egyptian, and that came from Arlington. So much of this came from the Lexington, Middlesex County area, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Now, was this program with just the Massachusetts State Department of Agriculture or the United States Department of Agriculture?
This was federal, I'm not sure on this, I think it was state and federal money. The Boston Market Gardeners Association pushed for this to improve the vegetable quality. My grandfather was president of that, my uncle Walter was president, later changed to New England Vegetable Growers, I was president, and my son Jimmy was president. So we had 4 generations president
And
of
it's
that
still
association.
operating out of Waltham Greenhouses?
No, that's closed now. UMass closed that.
Oh, that's right, not that long ago.
No, not that long ago.
And now do they operate in another part of the state?
They operate at Amherst, and they
Okay.
also operate in Connecticut stores.
Oh, okay. With the University of Connecticut? I
Yeah,
imagine.
yeah.
And that reminds me of the Schumacher farm that was up off of, was it Wood Street?
Yeah, Gus
And
Schumacher.
Gus Schumacher, and didn't he become like
He
the
was Secretary of
Secretary,
Agriculture.
He was
Secretary of
yeah.
Agriculture? Yeah.
He'd
I remember
been in
Alan speaking of him.
politics really all his adult life. And Schumacher's came from Long Island, New York. It was a big operation there, vegetables. They sold that when Gus came here, and they farmed Lexington and Lincoln.
You knew Gus Schumacher, is that right?
Yes, yeah, we still to this day are very good friends. And Gus is in Washington now, he has a place, residence on the Cape.
Mhm.
His brother is in the landscape business. And we all grew up together. They were more Alan's age than my age.
Okay, but they had the farm up on Wood Street.
On Wood Street and another one on Lincoln.
And what did they grow up there?
Parsnips was there. Parsnips, rhubarb, carrots, bean, all that.
All right.
Beans.
So what other farms now do you remember? Porter Wilson?
Across
or-
from Schumacher was Polly. Do you remember
Polly's?
Polly's farm?
Oh, that. Eleanor Polly was my first grade girlfriend.
First
Well,
grade?
So that,
Well,
first
how did she
grade.
get from Wood Street over to Adams School?
Well, she lived right down off of Pleasant Street. I went to Adams School.
Then she married a Polly and moved to Wood Street.
No,
She
no,
wasn't.
that was the Donna now.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Mother and father moved to Wood Street and started a poultry farm.
Yes, I remember, and I remember when the barn burned down.
Yeah.
Our family were friends with the Pollys. We used to always go over there and I guess get eggs or what have you. And probably in the 50s, the barn caught
Yeah.
fire. And that pretty much ended the Polly farm.
Then they had Lexwood Poultry Farms across the street. That was Gail Smith.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. But we had a lot of turkeys in Lexington. I know we still do have a lot of turkeys in Lexington.
How about you?
We had a lot of turkeys running around on the land. There were
Yeah.
many turkey farms.
They're everywhere, those wild turkeys. And they survived pretty well in Lexington.
Do they bother you?
No.
Bother your crops?
No, but up until probably the 50s, maybe even the 60s, there were turkey farms that actually raised the turkeys for Thanksgiving or whatever.
They had on Merritt Road, from Lincoln Street north, there were 2 turkey farms. Barry Mead Farm was one of them, and Mr. Serrano was selectman at the time. It was Mr. Serrano that owned it. Going south, Miller's had a few. Then you got to Idlewild Farm with the Napolis.
Right?
They had a lot of turkeys.
Okay.
And the Napoli family moved to Acton and
Right.
has a very successful farming operation.
And they have quite a successful stand there.
They have a very successful stand. Nice family, 3 brothers.
Right.
Tom was the father, Tom Napoli. His 3 boys started the farm in West Acton.
And when the town bought the Idlewild farm, and they managed to keep the land for conservation in the back and sold off, I guess, the frontage of Idlewild Farm on Merritt Road where the farm stand was, and up, I guess it's Middle Street,
Yep,
and then along Lincoln Street.
all the way up to Lincoln Street.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, there were so many farms. There was a fruit farm, Lima, Lima, and Jimmy Lima was a policeman in Lexington, then transferred to state police.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I remember him.
They had a fruit farm right where the ramp comes off of Route 2 onto Waltham Street. If you're coming south
Okay.
on Route 2, the ramp goes to your right naturally,
Yeah.
but right at the end of that ramp on Waltham Street, almost from there down to where Johnny Carroll's driving range,
Okay.
there, that area. They had a fruit stand. They grew mainly apples. It was an apple farm.
Okay. Yeah, there were a lot of apple orchards around.
Yeah.
Apple orchards down along Mass Ave, where Minuteman Lane was, and those houses were built. Up in Sun Valley, up against Winchester, wasn't that
Yeah,
apple
there
orchards?
was apple orchards up there.
Right.
Both sides of the street there were really show rich farms that people wanted to come out to the country and have a country farm in a mansion.
Gentleman farming, do they call that?
Yeah,
or-
gentleman farming.
Right.
But they were
Right.
large scale, large acreage. They weren't necessarily large scale,
Okay.
but the acreage was large. One of the biggest holdings of land in the area was the Howard Monroe Farm. That's where all of the Kelley houses were built. They owned a lot of land on Maple Street, a lot of
Yes.
land on Lowell Street.
Where Harrington School is?
Yeah, where Harrington School
And
is.
then
all the way-
across all the way up to Woburn Street.
Yeah, all the way to Woburn Street and down Woburn Street a little bit. Peachtree Lane, all
Okay,
there.
yep.
That was a big, that was probably in his day, right after the war, that was one of the biggest projects Lexington ever saw up to that point,
Oh, the housing.
the housing.
Okay. Let me ask you if you recall, Don, with the Woodhaven area off of Spring Street, which was all built up after the war for,
Yeah.
veteran housing. Was that dairy farm area down in there? From between, say, Spring Street and Waltham Street? What was that land?
Down on the flats, you had the Ricky Farm.
Okay, right.
That was in there, at the corner of Waltham Street and Merritt Road, where the dry cleaners and, the dry cleaners and the gas station.
Uh-huh.
It's dry cleaners now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
there
would
is
be on
one
the
there.
southeast, that would be on the
Yep.
northeast,
That's where
southeast.
Potter's building is. Yeah.
No, across from that, on the other corner.
Okay. Oh, you mean where the gas station used to be?
Where the
There's a
Jenny gas station used
Yeah,
to be.
yeah.
There were two things there. There was a hatchery where they hatched chicks. Everybody wanted chicks, went there. That was the big hatchery for all the farms around there. Chick
Okay.
hatchery. And before that, there was non-portable, because they have portable ones now, stone crusher. This was a fixture there. And they used to pay the farmers, they 25 cents a ton. And the farmer, when they'd clear the fields or move a wall or something, they'd drag the stones up on what they call stone boats. That's where they got the name of it.
Uh-huh.
There was a steel head, probably about 4 feet wide, with a factory-built head. It's curved steel, so it could
Right.
be pulled easy. No wheels, and usually elm flooring, and they just took elm, green elm, and made boards out of it, sometimes 2 inch, and some of them would go 3, really heavy, 3. And put the header board, header on it, the steel header board. And you take the stone boat, pull alongside of a big stone, and put a rolling hitch on the stone. Dug out all around the big, this was boulders, this is when we did anything with dynamite or bulldozers.
Right.
The chain had a circular link in the back and a hook on the front. You put the chain around the stone at ground level, where you dug out.
Right.
And then at the back, you had the ring, and you put the chain up through the ring and over the top of the rock. So it was, the leverage was pulling
Right.
that
Rolling.
way, yeah. And of course, you had your horses, and if you were lucky, you had a really good team that knew what they were doing. And you'd tell them, let's go. And they knew they only had one pull, because after you pulled once, the chain would slip off, you'd have to hook it up
Right.
again. And they'd start up slow if they were trained, and you could just see them pulling, and that stone would roll out of there and roll up the banking and drop onto the stone boat. And the stone boat wasn't more than 5 inches high at the most. So
then
no,
they
there was no
dragged it.
lifting.
No lifting, so they dragged the rock over to the,
They dragged it over there and got 25 cents a ton.
so they made little rocks out of big rocks.
I just don't know how they weighed it. Somebody had to pick it up, put it on a scale.
Good question.
Somebody did it by volume,
Yeah,
and I bet they had their thumb on the scale when they
they
were.
probably did. At 25 cents a pound, you don't want to make any, I mean, 25 cents a ton.
Ton.
You don't want to make any mistakes.
Right.
So, okay, so let's
Okay.
talk about Mass Ave. You said you had some stories to tell us about
Well,
Mass Ave to
I
the
thought-
Arlington line.
I thought about Mass Avenue, and people say, well, it's getting crowded, you know, the buildings and this and that. And it took me a couple of days, because I could have forgotten a lot of the things that were there. From Maple Street to the Arlington line, Maple Street, Mass Ave to the Arlington line, there were 5 gas stations to start with. There were 3 car dealers. There was 1 grain store, 3 barber shops, 1 dry goods store, 3 variety stores, 4 garages, 1 large animal vet. Wait, there's more, believe it or not. We had the Rest Inn, which
Yeah.
was a questionable hotel.
Yes, it was.
We had 2 tourist houses. We had, let's see, 1 junkyard. There were 4 commercial vegetable farms and a large, what they call hothouse greenhouse facility, where you brought the greenhouses in and brought the plants in and forced them in the spring. It was a long stem with bright red color, but the little leaf on top was no bigger than an oak leaf, and that was yellow because it never saw the sun. It was raised in a dark hothouse. there were, let's see, there was the Boozer Farm, the Cataldo Farm, Alex Wilson Farm, which was my grandfather, John Wilson Farm, which was my grandfather's cousin, and Jim Wilson, which was my grandfather's sponsor when he came here from Ireland. There were 3 commercial dairy farms, Buttrick and Daniels, 2 dairy farms, Cummings and Spalding, 2 fur farms, and a 3-story processing for processing, and a harness shop.
The processing, Don, what was that, processing of produce?
No, processing the furs. They
Oh,
had
oh.
to scrape, I don't know exactly.
Tannery, if you will?
Tannery type. I think what they did there was scrape them down, stretch them, and they put salt on them on the skin side, and packed them and baled them for sale after. They just sold them to the fur.
And on Mass Ave, where was that actually located?
That was part of Szymanski's
Okay,
garage.
right at the corner of Oak Street.
Corner of Oak Street. There were the 3-story building was to the north of Szymanski's. Szymanski's was a 2-story, but 40, 50 years ago they took the top story off and it's 1-story now.
So all these places you're speaking of, they were there during your childhood?
Yes, every one of them. I'm thinking of that. I remember the Rest Inn. As a kid, it had been abandoned, and we'd go down there and play in the Rest Inn. I think, if I remember, it was 3 stories,
Yep.
and a big ballroom
On the top floor?
on the top floor.
Right, and it had a spring floor on it
Yeah.
for dancing.
Yeah. And the junkyard was there, because we used to take our junk up there. That was between Curve Street and the fire station.
Where Lexington Toyota is today, is that where the Rest Inn was?
No,
About
it was where Alex Oil
a
was.
little further down.
Yeah, yeah.
And what was, oh, Childs,
Calvin W. Childs.
right, Cal-
Ford,
it was a
Ford.
Ford dealership.
yeah,
Right, right. And what about wardrobes, going a little further towards?
yeah, that was
the
one,
side?
that was
Corner of
one,
Curve Street. And that.
yeah.
Okay,
And there
I remember
wasn't there a
that.
grocery store right at the Rotary?
There were
Yeah,
A
5,
dry goods store,
a brick,
grocery store? or
yeah,
something?
there were 5 grocery stores. There was the A&P, the First National, and
Okay.
3 independents, David
Wow.
Kidd on the Arlington line, David Kidd Grocer, and Berman's, that was a grocery store.
Berman's, which is now the liquor store, was
Yeah.
a grocery store?
They were on the other side, they moved across the street,
Oh,
They were
okay.
on the-
Didn't know that.
west side of the street.
Huh.
You know, the kids, and they had deliveries. So what they did, they had the carts, grocery carts. They were fairly lightweight, but they were a little bit bigger than a wheelbarrow with 2 large steel wheels and a smaller steel wheel in front, so it was 3 wheels. And it was probably 3.5 feet wide, maybe 4 to 5 feet long. And they would call in their order to the First National or to the A&P, and there was always kids that were hanging around there. And the customer would order their order, and the grocer would pack it up, and the kids would get a tip.
Sure.
And they loved to go, Fallen Road was all right, Pleasant Street was good, Watertown Street was good, Maple Street. Nobody liked to go up Oak Street.
Oh, why not?
You couldn't get up
Oh,
there and down.
because it was so steep.
It was a hard push up, and it was even more of a job if it was a slippery at all getting down, because that's a very steep hill.
Yeah.
So a little while later, Mr. McPhee, who had a dairy farm up there, they let him build a variety store on the top of the hill.
Huh,
And it was there for many, many years, Carville Avenue.
okay.
He just took the front room, his living room and dining room, put a picture window in it, and set up a store.
Couldn't do that today.
No.
In a residential neighborhood.
But, the neighbors would love it though, because it was so hard to get up that hill. And that's why, you think about it, that's why there weren't many dairy farms on top of a hill. Vegetable farms, one thing, the land wasn't always that good, but there's some. Winchester is a good example of that, near St. Eulalia's Church, up at the top of the Turkey Hill in Winchester.
Yeah, that's up, you go up Johnson Road, Winchester
Country
Drive.
Club? Yeah, where the Winchester Country Club is?
No, the other side of the hill.
Yeah, no.
But the thing being, and they had a big farm up there, it was in Winchester. They couldn't go to market because in the wintertime when it was snowy, because the horses couldn't get down the hill, and even though they had calks in their shoes, they were afraid of the horse slipping, and with a load on it,
Yeah.
it pushed the horses all the way to the bottom.
Yeah, not good.
So there were very few days could they get down the hill with the heavy stuff. A sleigh or a light wagon, they'd do it. But to move anything heavy, they stayed home.
And going back, you mentioned Buttrick. It was a dairy farm. So were they the ones that started the Buttrick ice cream place then out on
True.
Route 2,
Well,
2A, going towards?
the first Buttrick was right in the middle of the bridge on Bedford Street and 128. Where
Yes.
the bridge
Yes,
and the ramps are
yes.
now is where the
I knew
first Buttrick's ice cream was.
Right.
Before that, it was Smith Bell Farm.
that. Yep,
That was sort of a variety
okay.
store. And the Reed Farm, which
Oh,
was
yeah.
Haskell Reed's
Hack Reed.
fathers
Mhm.
and his uncles, they were on Lowell Street.
Right.
And
Almost to the Arlington
Yeah,
line?
they
Right.
combined with the Buttrick
Oh.
outfit. And it was Buttrick Reed Buttrick for a while.
But didn't they start the ice cream parlor that was up on, you remember that, Peter?
Oh, yeah, it was an ice cream stand up on
A long
by,
ice cream stand.
Minuteman National Park.
Yeah.
Yeah, on the way to Lincoln. Must have
They-
been the same butcher.
They did, yeah.
Oh.
They did that when the state took the land for 128. So they moved
Oh.
from Lexington to Lincoln. That's Lincoln where they
Okay,
were.
that would have
Oh.
been the late 40s.
Yeah.
You're right, I always thought of it as Lexington, but you're right, it's Lincoln.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
So Dawn, do you have a memory in town of the sultry tracks or the sulky tracks or
There were two of them.
there was one on Bow Street and one on Middleby Road or by the Bridge School?
And there was one on...
Grant Street.
Grant Street, yeah, Bow Street.
Yeah, well, there were...
Bowser,
Bowser's.
Right.
Yeah.
Bowser, that's right there.
There was two more in East Lexington. One, Dr. Alderman, which has that turned into a beauty parlor and the tourist home. He had a big barn out back, and he also bred trotters and bought trotters from all over the world, all over the country.
So they would race them in Boston?
The big track for trotters was Saratoga Springs in New York.
Oh,
And they'd go there for the summer meet, and I believe they'd go to New Jersey for another meet, and perhaps Rockingham. I don't know if Rockingham had trotters or not. You have to have two surfaces. You build a trotter's surface on the track, or you build what they set up, the flats, meaning you were riding on the horse.
Okay.
The flats have one track, and the trotters do not race well, if at all, on that surface. It's not like putting a piece of asphalt down and everybody runs on it. You put a mixture of clay and sand for the trotter's feet, and then you put another mixture on for the flats. Now, I don't know where the word the flats came from, but that's what you hear the old timers talking about.
But they still existed in your day in town?
Yeah. And there was one right across the street, which is conservation now, just north of Toyota. Just on the same side of the street as Toyota, behind Cummings's barn there, which now is a house.
Okay.
They converted the barn and the cottage behind the cemetery, the Robbins Cemetery, is it?
Right.
All right, right behind that,
Oh,
between there and the railroad tracks, was a very good
Oh, okay.
trotting track.
On the south side of the railroad tracks?
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Okay.
yeah.
And they bred the best trotting horses in the country came from the Orient Hanover, the Hanover Shoe Farm. They're known worldwide. because they've gone out of business now too. But Hanover horses were always had the prefix on it of Orient Hanover, or Spring Hanover, or whatever. And if you had the Hanover name in your breeding line, you had the cream of the crop. And most of the horses in Lexington all had that Hanover name in their name.
So Lexington was quite a home for trotters and
Oh, yeah.
raising
Yeah.
And,
horses.
and the Bowser estate was part of that, they did trotters there, didn't they?
Yeah. I know the Bowser estate, but I can't for some reason I can't remember whether they had trotters or flats.
Okay.
I would
yeah.
assume they had trotters because it was a well-known breeding circle. And flats just probably wouldn't fit in.
And you went to Muzzy as middle school and high school, Muzzy built the Muzzy building.
Yeah.
And did you go over to Grant Street to that Bowser estate for gym classes?
No, we used to sneak into the swimming pool at night.
What swimming pool is that?
Paul Bowser had the big swimming pool out by the track.
Oh.
And I knew where the track was, but it was always at night, and we'd ride our bikes over there. And they kept the track, the swimming pool immaculate. And I don't think he really cared, because nobody ever chased us. It said no trespassing, but it was night and we didn't
So
read
you
it.
rode all the way from East Lexington to
It
there.
wasn't very too far, you
A
know,
couple
kids,
miles.
2 miles on a bike
Right.
is nothing.
Right.
So the East Village was a very busy place.
It was a
when you were
very
growing
busy
up.
place.
Yep.
It was its own sort of community in
Village.
town,
Yeah.
East Lexington, where now most of that has gone by.
It has, in doing this list, I started, like I said, quite 3 days ago. And I keep thinking of, oh, there was one more thing, there was one other there. And probably from the time I was 6 or 7 years old, because I always loved agriculture, I loved farms, I loved something going on. And I remember all of these buildings and all of these things that were taken down, and you tend to forget over the years, but when you drive by, you remember it.
What was your favorite store to go to as a boy along the East Lexington Avenue? Was there a grocery store? Or?
And that was First National store. It was before they built the First National, which is now Panera Bread. Where Panera Bread
Correct.
is.
I remember that when I was a boy. And then
Me
they
too.
moved up to Bedford
Bedford
Street
Street.
when Worthing Road was open.
Yeah,
To where Rose Chevrolet was.
Yeah.
No, that was the A&P.
that was
that was the
A&P.
A&P.
Walgreens is where the first
Walgreens
National.
is where the First National was. Right.
Got the one up on Mass Ave in East Lexington closed when they opened the one in the center. I think the First National.
Oh, okay.
That Mr. Burns from Waltham ran for years. Ran that store.
Both in East Lexington then in the
No,
center?
no, they didn't take him to the center. He was quite disappointed.
Oh, okay, so they opened up and kind of put him out of business then.
Well, they came in, he said they just came in one night and said, we want inventory by Monday morning. And Monday morning, they shut the door, and that was the end of the First National in East Lexington.
Huh.
So he wasn't a happy camper.
No.
What year would you put on that, Don? Before the war?
Yes, just before the war,
Okay.
because we used to go up, we have to go uptown to do the shopping up there.
No fair.
Right.
One of the things that still is there is Fallen Church.
Yeah.
Now, the little lot across from Fallen Church, legend has it that that's the first place they sold Christmas trees. Is that right?
Yes, as far as I know. That was the old Adams School. My mother taught in that old Adams School.
Okay, across from Fallen
Across from the
Church.
Fallen Church.
Right.
And there's some story, I've read it, that was the first Christmas tree. Dr. Charles Fallen was the minister.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess they used Christmas trees in Germany. He was German.
Mm-hmm.
And he felt that we should have some here. So they went and cut Christmas trees in the woods, not necessarily the type that we have today, and sold them there.
What
Well-
is it you'd like to speak about right now?
Well, a couple of things. In East Lexington, I just jotted down the farms that were working farms in what I'd call the East Lexington area. There were 6 large commercial dairy farms, I mean big farms. And in those days, anything over 50 cows was a big farm. And there were 6 small dairies where the operators probably had 8 to 10 cows and sold the milk retail in the neighborhood.
Now, how much would a cow, you have some information that your father or your grandfather wrote down about the prices of things like, and there was something about a cow selling for $25 or something?
$45.
$45. And what would a cow go for today?
A prime cow, and they grade them today too, the milk cows, you know, what class they sit into, goes from 1900 to 2200. That's without the pedigrees. That's
Okay, without the pedigrees. Okay, so sorry to interrupt, go ahead.
And we had 5 orchards. We had 8 commercial vegetable farms. This is East Lexington. 8 commercial vegetable farms, 5 large commercial poultry farms, 6 small poultry farms, 5 large pig farms. By large, that could be anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500. We had 3 greenhouse farms and a large stock farm, which was on off Maple Street. The Ryder family owned it. It was a dairy barn, there was a stock barn, and further down the hill, at the bottom of the hill, on the south side, southeast, was a large poultry farm by the name of Chapman, and on the northwest side was sheep and pigs. And there was a sheep farm, a pig farm, and a stock farm and orchards in the back. The orchards went all the way over to where the nursery is now, was Gold Ribbon.
Seasons 4.
right.
Seasons 4.
Yeah,
Right.
Shemmons.
Right.
Well, it went all the way from Seasons 4 to just about the middle of, halfway down Maple Street toward Lowell Street. That was a big chunk of land.
So where Emerson Gardens is today on Maple Street,
Yeah.
what was that, the Chapman farm?
Yes.
That was the
No, it was the Lexwood Farm.
Lexwood
That
farm.
was Smith.
Okay.
There's a little bit of the west side of it was the Chapman Farm. That was maybe only 4 or 5 acres. And Mr. Maloney did the Emerson Gardens.
Mhm, right,
And Bob Cattell did the nursing home.
nursing home.
Yeah, one of the things people say when you tell them all that you read that and what the animals and the birds and the pigs and the turkeys and the whole thing. Well, where did the people live? There's not room for people. If in East Lexington there's that many cows, pigs, goats, and everything else, I said people lived very well, and everybody was very happy with what was there, except at the end of it when they started to beat up on the pig farms.
Yeah, no.
But the nicest thing was waking up in the morning and Lawrence Farm, which was Shanahan, was right next to us. And in the summertime when you'd have your windows open, the first thing you'd hear was the roosters crowing. And everybody had a few chickens, and then there were commercial people. But the roosters would get crowing on the West Farm side of the hill, and on the Fallen Road side of the hill, the other roosters would answer back. And that went back and forth in the clear air. It wasn't annoying, it was just a nice sound.
It was what you were used to, it was what started your day.
Yeah. And then about 5:30 in the morning, they'd start the compressor up for the milking machines. You didn't hear the milking machine, but you heard the vacuum pump and the motor for the vacuum pump. And that would ring right through especially on Sunday morning when there wasn't traffic.
I bet.
Once Route 2 became a really busy thoroughfare, you couldn't hear the milking machine in the morning anymore.
That's what I imagine cars and trucks a lot noisier.
There's a lot
than they are
noisy.
today.
But just hearing that milking machine, you knew what time it was that pulsation. It was just went on for about 45 minutes. And then it went off until 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
So you milk twice a day.
Yeah,
You alluded to the fact that there were a lot of pig farms until people decided they didn't want pig farms anymore.
Yeah.
Was that because of the smell? Because I remember them, I grew up off of Woburn Street, and there were pig farms not far from me, and yes, we could smell them. Is that why they wanted to get rid of them, or were there other reasons?
well, that was one of the reasons, and nobody wanted to buy a house. Where's your house? What's next to the
Right.
pig farm?
Right.
Woburn Street had Mr. Wood.
Mhm.
You remember him?
No, I don't.
Mr. Wood was a full-blooded Indian, a very tall man, a thorough gentleman.
Hmm.
He was probably 6'2", 6'3", broad shoulders, spoke perfect English. And at the time, I think when everybody else, he was one of the last ones. And he said, no, I have my Indian rights, and my pig farm is going to stay here until I want to leave. And it did.
Hmm.
But he was such a gentleman, and he had snow white hair and a lot of hair. I just remember him, and such a big man. You always look up to him, and nobody ever called him anything but Mr. Woods. You didn't call him by his first name, and I don't think anybody ever knew it.
Huh. Yeah,
But
no.
he was a great gentleman.
No, I knew the
So big-
Frazieries, and, I mean, there were a lot of families around.
Pig
around
farm
there.
stayed on till after the war, probably into the 50s. What do you figure, was John Carroll one of the last ones to have pigs up there on Waltham Street?
I think so, yeah, that was
Yeah.
about the last.
Well, we got a few minutes left, and I think if Dawn could help us out with how Lexington was changing so rapidly after World War II. And we'll talk a little bit about how things developed or didn't develop in town. 128 came in north to south, or south to north, out there sort of through some of the farms out in the western part of the town. Route 2 went east to west,
Yeah.
and Route 3 was coming down from New Hampshire. And there was talk about carrying it right through Lexington. Do you remember that?
I do, very well. Because it would have affected us, it would have taken half the farm.
Right. And this would have been in the mid-50s or early
Yes,
50s?
Yeah, early 50s.
And how did that get stopped? Do you remember how the town decided to try to put a brakes on that? And what deal was struck with the Worthing Road, Emerson Road plan?
I think that we had a planning director by the name of Zelensky, I think it was. And he had a very strong Russian accent. It was almost harsh. And they'd done a lot of planning and what else could we do, how can we stop it? And then somebody came up, and I probably was Mr. Zelensky, that we'd put Emerson Road in, we'd put Worthing Road in. And that would take the traffic away from Lexington Center. And the outbound traffic from Boston would go up Route 2 and onto 128, and wherever they were going from there, they could go to the
They
Route
go up
3.
Route 3 from there.
From there, they'd go up to Route 3. And it was quite a controversy for 2 years. Mr. Zelensky was going to present at the town meeting. They were talking about that. And I remember at one of the meetings, and he was for Route 3, even though he worked on Emerson Road and the Worthing Road, which neither one were ever finished.
Right.
And he said, well, I still feel Route 3 is a good proposal. But he said, for the name Zelensky and a strong Russian accent, I should not present this to town meeting. So I don't think it ever got presented at town. I think by that time the feeling was starting to go.
Well, so when they left the idea of Route 3 continuing down through Lexington, across perhaps your farm to Route 2,
Yeah,
and the idea and the deal to create Emerson Road, which we all know is a quite wide roadway, as is Worthing Road. Emerson Road was going to start on Grove Street
yeah.
and carry, and there are pieces that were called Emerson Road, never really completely connected. The one that got closest to you folks would have been Emerson Garden Roads, as we know today,
Yeah.
and it stops dead down at the nursing home. But the plan, when it was originally laid out, would have included crossing part of your land and connecting to Route 2 out
Yes,
by Arlington or?
no, going out to where
Child's
Child's gas station was,
Okay.
that would be the rotary there or the bridge.
Okay, and how did the Wilsons feel about that?
Not good
Not
at
good.
all. There wouldn't have been enough left to farm. And it would have been an intersection at Mass Avenue, had to go through the Great Meadow, and then swing north
Right.
to hit Emerson Road at the
At the
the-
apartments.
apartments.
What was, the Great Meadow not preserved at that point, or was it preserved but they were gonna
No,
take it anyway?
I don't think it was preserved at that point. Town of Arlington owned that.
Right, right.
And the town of Arlington owned it since I think the mid-1800s, 1880s, maybe 1860s, and they were gonna make a reservoir out of it for water.
Yeah,
It was a flat land and they were gonna pump it, fill it full of water, and then MWRA, or goodness knows what happened, but so that stayed empty, but it's still in the ownership of Arlington.
And this is all behind Emerson Gardens off of
Right.
Maple Street, going over to the Arlington line,
Yes.
that whole area
It's
there.
behind Mass
Right.
Ave, and it's behind Adams School and all that.
Right.
see, for the water supply, what you don't realize, just about Mass Avenue and spot on Concord Avenue, everything from there goes into the Charles River.
Right,
And everything on this side goes into the Mystic River.
right.
Oh,
So the barrier is really right about where Wilson Farm is,
The watershed.
The watershed. After that, it all goes into the Charles River.
and you have a natural stream, don't you, coming through the farm?
Yes, yeah.
A natural stream, yeah.
But I think that stream, which flows north, right, to the Mystic, the
No.
stream that's flowing through your farmland is flowing under Mass Ave.
It goes under Mass Ave and turns right and goes southeast from there.
Okay,
It goes by the Schwab Mill in Arlington.
yes,
It goes by where Buttrick's Ice Cream was. It goes by
right,
it goes into the Mystic Lakes
Okay.
and, from
yes.
and feeds the Mystic Lakes.
So the town was able to stop both Route 3's expansion and eventually Emerson Road's expansion.
Yeah.
It never encroached on your farm. It was,
It got close. We
got
put some gray hairs on our head, I'll tell you.
but this was something that was being funded and supported by Lexington as a community, as opposed to Route 3.
Yes.
But the state wasn't really part of this plan. It was the town's idea to do bypass roads north and south
Yeah.
of the center. And then as the pieces were created, people built houses on them and they spoke up and said, we don't want a highway in front of our house. And then the wetlands laws came in the 60s, 64, I think the first Wetland Protection Act came in.
It'd be very difficult to do.
Very difficult.
Yeah. Well, you look at Bedford and the Great Road in Bedford is a disaster. And as you go up Bedford Street and then cross into Great Road,
Right.
where would you put a relief for the road up in Bedford
Yeah.
Center? It just gets worse and worse and worse.
Right. We were up there yesterday.
Last night we were up there, and it
And
was
it's-
awful.
Even when you
But
take
it-
the back road, Page Road, and you try to go
Yeah.
over by the Veterans Hospital.
But it was high school
everything's crowded.
graduation, I think,
Yeah,
and that's part of the reason
So-
why, but.
You know, now
Yeah.
help us out, because I think one of the interesting periods is the dynamics in the community after World War II and the tremendous growth that took place. And what is your memory, Dawn, about the town's idea or the town's thought of considering having the Burlington Mall located in Lexington? Do you remember those?
That was
days?
very controversial.
And it was going to be located where?
Where Shire Pharmaceuticals are now, which was Raytheon before,
Yeah.
and Kelsey Ranch
Yes.
was the original piece of
Right.
land. Well, at the time I was for it. And I look back now and I said, boy, oh boy, would that have been a mistake. I said, I was dead wrong on that one.
Yeah, better off being where it is.
Yeah,
right?
it does much better where it is.
Yeah.
Dawn, is there anything else, I have a few more things I want to ask you about, but is there anything else you want to make sure we get to today.
Well, just one of the things is, what's so different? We have a tour of the farm every other Thursday night, July and August. And so many people say, well, what's different now? When I was growing up, when my grandfather, all the way back, you stand in the middle of the farm, right today or tonight, and in 3 directions you can't see a single house. It's totally grown up. And if you look into the northwest, you can see a few houses. And I have had some pictures of that area back in the 30s. There was about four trees on the west farm and 1 big elm tree. There was nothing on the Mass Avenue side. There was very little in the corner of going toward the Child's gas station. And over to Trotting Horse Lane, there were some pine trees that had been knocked down, but some left in 38. But outside of that, just the barren fields that they needed for pasture. They had Shanahan's dairy and all of that, and that was all pasture land, open used land. And I find the same thing at Dunback Meadow. Dunback Meadow was a very productive meadowland. It fed probably 200 cows, and the other farm with Mr. Meek's farm, they had 15. And today, you look at that and you say, no, there's never a farm there. It's grown up, there's brush, there's...
Trees.
And to a farmer, a lot of people think it's beautiful, but to a farmer, it hurts. It hurts.
Interesting.
Not that I would want a dairy farm there, but
Yeah.
it was there, and they did an excellent job.
And so much of the land was cleared for any number of reasons for agricultural in town. And today, as you say, it's all grown up, trees everywhere, but the citizens now feel they have to protect every tree, and they're all concerned about preserving trees.
Yeah.
When we see, instead of farmland growing out of the countryside, we see big houses.
And we see wonderful
But-
farm stands.
Well, that's
We are,
good.
Great
we are
farm
very,
stands.
very lucky to have
Yeah,
Wilson
we're
Farms.
very
and-
lucky to have, we're very lucky to have the customers to come to them.
Well, that's
Right.
good.
Well, it seems to
And
be
you
a good relationship.
It
Yeah.
is, and you do so much for the town of Lexington, I know. I was there around Memorial Day, which we just passed through, and you have the veterans there, they had a table, and I know
Yeah.
the Girl Scout cookies are allowed to be sold there when the Girl Scout cookie season happens, and, you know, you're a wonderful contributor to the way of life in Lexington.
Well, the thing is going back when Alan and I started, and we had our wives, Lynn and my wife Betty, and they all helped out in the stand, they helped in the farm, Lynn wrote the cookbook, and just the family structure and the kids and everything, that really contributed so much, and means so much today. And it's just a nice feeling to have.
Well, even taking it in another direction, is it your nephew or John Wilson, who is the fire chief in Lexington now? So the Wilsons don't just contribute with the farm, our fire chief is a Wilson.
He's a cousin or second cousin.
Second
yes.
cousin, or,
And his brother is a manager on the farm in Lexington.
Oh.
And he's been with us, he's been with us probably, guessing again, probably 15 years anyway. Been there a long time. Yeah, and John Wilson's father, our grandfather, was also a fireman.
Oh, okay.
But that was more generations back than I can recall.
Well, you seem to have very loyal employees too at Wilson's. I know some of them have been there a very long time.
We made up a list from 30 years and over up to 41 years. I think we have 6 people who've been there
Really?
between 30 and 40 years.
It's great.
But you've been there longer than that.
I've been there longer than that.
Well,
It doesn't give me any special privileges.
Well, it
but
should. It should give you
They don't
lots of
let you take
special
any
privileges.
parsnips home at night?
Well, take some of Lynn's cakes home though.
Oh, that would be
Oh,
good.
yeah.
No, those are good.
Yep.
Well, it's been a wonderful relationship and a wonderful afternoon of
Yes,
stories.
it's been a
I'm
pleasure.
sure we could continue to talk another few days, but
Yeah.
what we've been able to capture from you and learn about both the Wilson farm and the community as it grew through the years as Lexington saw Wilson's farm grow has been a
Yeah.
treat.
Yeah.
Again, thank you very much, Don.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you.